The ground is level at the foot of the cross. There is room for Sabbath keeping. There is room for Sunday keeping. One of the greatest weaknesses of the Seventh-Day Adventist Church is an unwillingness to have open discussion. And I'm not saying this is everybody, but in a lot of churches, if you say something that contradicts or that may say an alternative perspective than what Ellen White says, you're tossed out. The gospel is the hill that we need to be willing to die on. When you read the book of Acts, you see Jewish Christians, you see Gentile Christians, different customs. You read Romans 14, different customs. There's room for diversity. But the one thing that we cannot compromise is the gospel. And once your customs, once your tradition, once your theological biases begin to bleed into the purity of the gospel, you are at risk of being cursed, as Galatians says. And that's not a light thing. For you to preach a gospel that is not pure in what it really is, according to the New Testament, is to risk having a curse placed on you.
Dang.
And that's not a small thing. That's the word that Paul uses. He literally says to the Galatians, who has bewitched you? Who has cast a spell on you? Like literally like witchcraft. Who has used words to cast this spell on you to make you think that you can save yourself through your law keeping, through your Sabbath keeping, through fill in the blank? Because if that was enough, Jesus would have never came. He wouldn't have to come. We would have been good. But because it's not enough to save us, he says, listen, sit down, be humble. I am going to tell you what the solution is, and you need to tell other people what I tell you the solution is, not what you think is the solution. Not what you want the solution to be, because it puts you a little bit higher spiritually or morally in your own mind compared to other people. The ground is level at the foot of the cross. There is room for Sabbath keeping. There is room for Sunday keeping. We literally see in the Bible, in the New Testament, we see the early church, we see Paul breaking bread, celebrating communion, commemorating the Lord's Supper on a first day of the week on a Sunday. For you to say that that is the mark of the beast is literally to blaspheme. Like to say that I am the judge now and what Paul did was wrong. And for you to try to do theological gymnastics and to say, oh no, it wasn't the mark of the beast then, but it will be the mark of the beast later. That's inconsistent. That is so inconsistent. Sin is sin for all time. Sin is not sin in one place and not sin in another place. If it's sin in the end times, then it had to be sin for Paul. And it wasn't sin for Paul because this is a man who wrote, more than 50% of the New Testament that God used, that, he laid down his life for this thing. So let's be consistent. Let's be honest with ourselves. One of the, and I'm just going to speak openly. One of the greatest weaknesses of the Seventh-Day Adventist Church is an unwillingness to have open discussion. And I'm not saying this is everybody, but in a lot of churches, if you say something that contradicts or that may say an alternative perspective than what Ellen White says, you're tossed out. When even she herself said, if I do not, if the testimonies, speaking about her writings, if the testimonies are not in line with what the Word of God says, toss me out. She literally says Christ and Belial cannot be united. So she even says that there's potential for her to be Belial, which is one of the Old Testament pagan gods. Which for a lot of people, they have, turned her into a Mary of sorts or a Pope of sorts where she has become infallible, and whatever comes out of her mouth is the word of God, and it has been established, and we can't question it. So there's so much to say here, but all I want to say is, let's go to the word of God. Let the word of God speak for itself, and let's just be honest with ourselves. Let's stop trying to defend something that is not the gospel.
So good. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. In the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not nullify the grace of God, for if righteousness were through the law, then Christ died for no purpose.